So this morning, I want to look at two things that Suzuki Roshi said. One thing that he said was he was walking down the hall with Mel Weitzman. Mel just recently stepped down as abbot of Berkeley Zen Center. He was, when I first started practice, he was abbot of San Francisco Zen Center in Tassajara. My very first monastic practice period was with Mel. But early on, he was walking down the hall with Suzuki Roshi, and apropos of nothing, spontaneously, Suzuki Roshi just turned to him and said, "You know, just to live is enough." And then kept on walking. Just to live is enough. May not feel like that for us, much of the time. We've got these problems, right? We've got our hang-ups, our habits, our troubles. And yet he said, just to live is enough. So I want to look at that. What could that mean? And look at that in relationship to another thing that he said. Apparently, in the where do I stop here? Yeah. Apparently, in the midst of Zazen, while all the students were sitting, he said to the room, to the Zendo, "You're perfect just the way you are, and you could use some improvement." And so I want to look at that this morning, that, our life has two sides to it. Just to live is enough. You're perfect just the way you are. You're a wondrous being, a miracle on 2 feet. And there's stuff to be done. There's work to be done. And that, linguistically, this may sound contradictory, illogical. But in lived experience for the practitioner, it makes perfect sense. And I'm going to try to elucidate in practice how that makes perfect sense. I'm going to start by telling you of a dream that I had. This week, a handful of nights ago, I had this dream where I was in this muddy pit working. And I was working in this muddy pit, building dams with my hands. And there's water, and I was like making these little walls of dams in this pit, and very happy doing it. In fact, this morning I remember this expression, and forgive the scatological character to it. I was like a pig in shit. Have you ever heard that expression? Happy as a pig in shit. In this dream, I was, it was work. It needed to be done, but I was happy doing it in this muddy pit. And in the dream, I'm in this pit doing this work. In this dream, somebody walks up to me and says, "That looks pretty gross. How can you be so happy?" And I looked up at him in the dream, and I gestured around me, and said, "Well, look where I'm working." And I was in Yosemite Valley, and there was thousands of foot tall sheer granite cliffs and waterfalls, And so I was working in this pit, muddy pit in Yosemite Valley. And Yosemite, I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but for me, it's one of the epicenters of spirit in my life. I encountered Yosemite once when I was too young to really remember much. I was maybe 5 or 6, but then we went when I was, I think, 13 or 14, and it just blew me away. And it's been a power place for me and a spiritual epicenter for me since then. Like Tassajara is for me as well. Those two places are pregnant with power, spiritual power for me. And so it's significant that so Yosemite for me, it's not just Yosemite. I like to say that Half Dome the mountain half dome was my first zazen teacher, because boom, half dome was right there. Wherever I was in the valley, boom, there was half dome. So that was the dream. I'm digging in this pit, making walls in this pit in Yosemite Valley. I'm doing this work, dealing with mud and water. But I'm doing this work in paradise, you know. And, you know, this perfect place, you know, heaven on earth. And then there's these muddy walls, so they got to be building. So, you know, things were perfect just the way they were, but, you know, I had work to do. And I thought that dream was very, very interesting. It kind of like expresses what Suzuki Roshi is talking about. You know, there's work to be done. We've got this thing that in Buddhism we call karmic conditioning. We've got habits that have been developed due to the three unwholesome roots of greed, hate, and delusion. You know, if we're human beings, we've played that game, and so we've got that in our system. You know, we've got attachments, we've got aversions, we've got people we like, people we don't like. We've got things about ourselves we like, things about ourselves we don't like, and you know, it makes for confusion, and it makes for suffering, and you know, we need to skillfully address that. But we also have pure awareness. We also are alive and conscious right here, right now. We have this precious jewel of awareness. And if we can bring those two together, do the necessary work, but recognize that we already have the most precious thing, that we don't need to work to acquire it, then there can be a spirit of playfulness about dealing with the things that we have to deal with. I think that's why Suzuki Roshi was very clear. You're perfect just the way you are. He didn't say but, he said and. You're perfect just the way you are, and you could use some improvement. These two support, they're not contradictory in practice. Linguistically, they may seem contradictory, but in practice, they're complementary. And having some appreciation of how they dance together can make practice more joyful. It can make working on our karmic conditioning more joyful. A spirit of play can actually be evoked, dealing with the things that we have to deal with. I want to share with you a passage from the Uttara Tantra Shastra. Uttara Tantra is an old Indian Mahayana text. I remember correctly, you know, there's speculation about the date of its composition. You know, I lose my place, it just flops over. I think the speculation is somewhere between 800 and 1100 Common Era. Don't hold me to that, because I'm not looking it up right now, I'm relying upon my dubious memory. So it's an early Mahayana text, it's an Indian text by a Sangha. Yeah, Sangha. But legend has it that actually it wasn't written by a Sangha, but it was dictated to a Sangha by the celestial bodhisattva Maitreya. Maitreya will, at some point, according to legend, incarnate on earth and be the next Buddha, the next human Buddha, like Shakyamuni Buddha was the Buddha way back then. But you don't have to believe that. You can take that as metaphorical truth. But there's something really special about the text. And I could go on about a Sangha and how he met Maitreya, but I think not this morning. It's a wonderful story about how a Sangha encountered Maitreya, but I'll save it for some other time, because I want to get into this passage here. And I'm going to read it and try to explain what's going on as I read it, because I think it pertains to this notion of we're perfect just the way we are. And there's things that you got to work on. You know, we're in the mud of samsara. We're in the mud of our karmic conditioning, and you know, if we don't want to make a mess of things, we need to look at that and try to clarify things. So we've got work to do, but that work is taking place in Yosemite Valley. It's taking place in paradise. It's taking place within Buddha nature, and that's the key term, Buddha nature. Another translation of this Shastra, the translator gave it the title Buddha nature, because this is the Tathagata tradition of Buddhism, the Buddha nature tradition of Buddhism. So here goes, and like I say, I'm going to try to explain things as I go along. Having said here and there in this teaching that just like clouds, dreams, and illusions, all knowable objects are empty in every respect, why then did the Buddhists teach here that the Buddha element exists in each sentient being? So this is a key issue in this tradition within Buddhism. If everything is empty, if everything is not inherently existent, but merely transient arising of causes and conditions, how can we say that there's such a thing as Buddha nature? Tathagata. And the term Tathagata, real quickly, Tathagata is a name for the Buddha, the thus come one. That's a term, an honorific for the Buddha. Garbha means matrix or womb. So it could be translated as the Buddha matrix or the Buddha womb. Here it's translated as the Buddha element. So the Buddha nature that's present right now in awareness, always, never goes away. It's unborn, uncreated. It is the ground of awareness itself. If you're aware, you got Buddha nature, whether you actually experience things that way or not. That's the teaching of Tathagata. So it's saying here, if everything's empty, how can you say there's Buddha nature? You know, doesn't that contradict emptiness? So that's the big issue. Having said here and there that just like clouds, dreams, and illusions, that's the nature of things. They're just fantasy, really. All noble objects are empty in every respect. Why then did the Buddhists teach here that the Buddha element exists in each sentient being? And some other schools of Buddhism criticize the Tathagata school for this very thing. And so Maitreya or Asanga is addressing that here in this passage. They taught this so that those in whom they exist, they relinquish the 5 flaws of faint-heartedness, contempt for inferior beings, clinging to what is unreal, deprecating the real Dharma, and excessive self-cherishing. Okay. In that passage, they taught the Tathagata, they taught the Buddha nature, so that if we have karmic conditioning, we'll have some basis upon which to let go. If we think karmic conditioning is all we've got, we're going to be always trying to fix ourselves and not be satisfied with what we fixed. So, you know, we'll never be perfect just the way we are. We'll always be on a self-improvement program. It's never ending, and we won't be free. But teaching that there is the unborn, unstained awareness of Buddha nature, then you can work within a context of if you're perfect just the way you are. And there's this conditioning that's unreal, but we have to awaken to its unreality to be free of it. So that's what's being asserted here. They taught this so that those in whom they exist, they may relinquish the 5 flaws of faint-heartedness, contempt for inferior beings, clinging to what is unreal, a sense of who we are, clinging to our karmic conditioning, our identities, our precious identities, deprecating the real Dharma, and excessive self-cherishing. So those are 5 flaws. So, but basically that's our karmic conditioning. It's are clinging to the experiences that have caused us pain, prejudices, self-aggrandizement, what have you. You know, clinging to that conditioning. So then he goes on to explicate some. The meaning of these two verses is to be understood in brief by the following 10 verses. It has been stated that the conditioned phenomena in myriads of beings are void, empty in all aspects, with the entities of afflictions, karma, and their maturations resembling clouds, and so on. So it's just like clouds obscuring the blue sky, obscuring the sunlight. That's a metaphor that's used in this text. And this translator translates it as when the clouds part. So our karmic conditioning, our flaws, the things we need to improve, are just clouds. And the sun is always shining beyond the clouds. Even if it's a cloudy day, if you get in an airplane and get high enough, there'll be blazing sunlight. The sun is always shining, even when there's clouds. It's just that, the clouds are obscuring the sun. Buddha nature is always in awareness. Buddha nature is awareness itself in its primal state, in its pristine state. The capacity to be aware is Buddha nature, and we always have that. We can always hear the sound of the traffic on the street, but our conditioning, our narrative of who we are, what we like, what we dislike, where we're wrong, where we're right, obscures the raw, pristine quality of awareness, the Buddha nature quality of awareness. So, the afflictions resemble clouds. The performance of actions are like the experiences in a dream. And the skandhas, the 5 constituent elements, and that's another talk altogether. The maturations of afflictions and karma, our karmic conditioning, are like the magical manifestations in an illusion. And they're ephemeral. They don't have any real reality to them. They're just a story we tell ourselves, a dream we're having. Thus, not having heard about this basic element, this purity of awareness, and the illusory nature of our problems, not having heard of this teaching, in some who are faint-hearted, due to the flaw of self-contempt, the mindset for awakening does not arise. So in some who had not heard about Tathagata, the innate purity of mind, they haven't heard about that, all they see is their shit. All they see is their conditioning. So due to the flaw of self-contempt, the mindset for, playfully working in the mud and clarifying things does not arise. This is who I am. I'm just not a very patient person. I'm just a jerk. I'm just insecure. And we tell these stories, we reify these stories about ourselves, and the thought of our perfection, just the way we are, does not arise. And then even if some have given rise to bodhicitta, the mind of awakening, they may become proud and say, hey, I've got it. I am superior, and entertain the notion of inferiority about those in whom the bodhicitta has not arisen. So the other risk is, okay, we start to appreciate the fact that we can awaken, that that awareness is something precious, and we got it, and those folks don't. So, we're really cool. In those who think like that, perfect wisdom does not arise. Therefore, they cling to what is unreal and do not realize true reality. The flaws of sentient beings are unreal. I'm going to say that again. The flaws of sentient beings are unreal because they are fabricated and adventitious. What are real are the qualities whose nature is pure due to the identitylessness of these flaws. So there's the rub. It's a complicated thought, but those who are pride and think I've got it, those don't. They're reifying other people's faults. Other people are Buddha too. But they're grabbing onto the very thing that gave them some measure of freedom, realizing that their own flaws were illusions. They're forgetting when they look at other beings, and they're making their flaws real. And so perfect awakening can't arise in them because they can't see Buddha in others. They only want to look at themselves. And the flaws of sentient beings are unreal because they're fabricated and adventitious. They're just a story about our history. And we interpret it one way and limit the limitless nature of our actual being. All of the things that we hold over our own heads, like the sword of Damocles, ready to fall and pierce us in two. All those things that we feel ashamed of, all those things that we think are in our way, they're just figments of the imagination, products of discursive thinking. They're just products of the mind secreting thoughts. That's all they actually are. Hence, they're unreal. What is real is the smell of a flower, of a rose, the sound of a bird, the sound of the traffic on Main Street, the capacity of awareness to illuminate is what's real. That's what this sutra, this shastra rather, is proposing. The flaws of sentient beings are unreal because they are fabricated and adventitious. What is real are the qualities, the Buddha qualities: compassion, love, understanding. So when he says the qualities, he's talking about the qualities of the Tathagata Dharma, the Buddha nature. What is real are the qualities whose natures are pure due to the identilessness of those flaws. Those whose minds cling to unreal flaws and deprecate the real qualities do not attain the love of seeing themselves and sentient beings as equal. So the mind who clings to the unreal flaws and deprecates the real qualities doesn't attain the love of seeing Buddha nature in everything, in everyone. So the problem that we have, this teaching asserts, is that we cling to what is unreal and do not realize true reality. We cling to unreal flaws and deprecate the real qualities. Just because the flaws are unreal doesn't mean that they don't have effect. If we don't address the cognitive error of our thinking, we will just perpetuate. There is work to be done. If we keep playing the same tapes, those tapes will engender the same behavior, which will reify the story that's imprinted on those tapes. So we have to actually look at what's being played. What stories are we telling ourselves? What behaviors entrench our problematic situation that is causing us grief and suffering? That needs to be looked at. But it's just a story. If we reify it, we'll feel entrapped by it. If we recognize that it's just habit, it's just stories we've been telling ourselves, then a spirit of lightness and a spirit of play can enter into the work. To be as happy as a pig in shit to muck around in the mud when you're in Yosemite Valley. When you bring your pristine awareness to your problems, there's a possibility of joy. There's a possibility of vitality and patience and generosity and care in the work that's the pure qualities that are already present in the nature of awareness itself. Awareness is free. It doesn't cost anything. awareness is effortless. You don't have to try to see the trees. You look and the trees, awareness is spontaneous and effortless in its raw state, in its pristine state. So if we can tap into that, we'll have a tremendous resource for doing the work that needs to be done. We're perfect just the way we are, and there's work to be done. The work to be done, I'm tempted to say, is a lot easier when we recognize our perfection, but I could also propose that possibly the work to be done is impossible without some contextualizing it within our perfection, our innate pure awareness, because we'll just create another more sophisticated mess for ourselves in the process of trying to undo the messes we already have. But if we bring perfect just the way we are to it, then there's a likeness of being and tremendous resources of energy. The energy of the sun itself can be applied to our problem. So, I'm going to close the Uttara Tantra with my notes for a second here. So one thing that if you make effort negotiating the way with some sincerity, things will look like they're getting worse sometimes. It's important to say, because that's a very common experience, is that I wrote here in the notes, the mud you have to work with is proportional to your sincerity to cultivate virtue. So, in proportion to your sincerity to cultivate virtue will be the shit that you see. I'm using another scatological term, but it seems so appropriate, I can't control myself, I guess. It's analogous to this. When you're doing shamatha practice, when you're trying to stabilize awareness and cut through discursive thinking, take a break from discursive thinking. When you first try to do that, the ancient meditation manuals say that it will seem like thoughts are proliferating. It seems like you're getting worse. You try to calm your mind and it just gets more and more thinking. And the texts say, actually what's happening, thoughts aren't increasing, but you're noticing them. You're putting them in a different context where you're more aware of how noisy the mind inherently is most of the time. So because you're paying attention, it looks like things are getting worse by contrast. But actually, you're just noticing what the mind has been doing all along, and that's a good thing. It may not feel fun if you're expecting some big peace, some big, pleasant, placid experience, but it's a good thing because that's a starting point. Acknowledging what's going on is a starting point. So that's like the first stage of shamatha, is having enough composure, having enough groundedness to see how noisy the mind has become habituated into being. Likewise with other virtues, other paramitas. If you take up the practice of cultivating generosity with some measure of sincerity, if you're doing it effectively, you're going to start to see how stingy you can be. And you might be dismayed at how self-clingy and stingy you can be when you have some sincere motivation to practice generosity. Practicing Kshanti paramita, practicing patience. If you approach it with sincerity, you're going to see how impatient you can be. Or with paramita of ethical discipline. If you try to live with care, you'll notice your carelessness more readily than if you're not aspiring to practice care and ethical discipline. So, if you have some sincerity in your practice, it will seem like your flaws proliferate. It could. There's a likelihood that if you're sincere in your practice, you'll start to see your shit more clearly. And if you're not careful, it can become a discouragement and you could abandon the effort. But if you're doing your work in Yosemite Valley, if you remember you're perfect just the way you are, if you find some way to take refuge in your Buddha nature, then you can persevere. So just heads up, if you practice with sincerity, you're liable to see your non-virtue pretty clearly when you endeavor to practice virtue. It may not be fun, but it's a good thing if you persevere. It will help you on the path. What also will help you on the path is to appreciate your Buddha nature, to find some way to appreciate your Buddha nature, which happens in Zazen. And this part of the talk, I'm little hesitant about. I don't want to give you something to get attached to or to inculcate some gaining idea in your practice. But still, I'm going to mention that when you practice mental stabilization, when you practice trying to take a break from the perpetual discursive thinking and a little bit of gap in the noise takes place, it can feel quite wonderful. A phenomenon become more vivid with a quiet mind. They enter more deeply into the heart, is how Suzuki Roshi would put it. You know, the sound of the birds, the smell of the insects, the taste of food. And you go, oh my goodness, you know. And at first it might seem like really, 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 really wonderful, you know. And you might start to cry, as Suzuki Roshi says, because things seem too real to you. So you're getting a certain signpost towards the beauty of awareness when we're not preoccupied with the churning of discursive thinking. That can happen. And for many of you who've been practicing, you probably have had those moments. But Buddha nature is not any experience, not even a joyful, blissful experience. In one of his lectures, Suzuki Roshi says, experience is not important, but the way you had that experience is. And that same way will help you when you have some difficulty. So in your meditation, when there's a gap in the noise or conditioning, we might have some brief ephemeral insight into how we're perfect just the way we are. And you can appropriately feel gratitude for that to nurture your endeavor. Please don't try to camp there. Don't try to grab onto that as some sort of attainment, because it's not Buddha nature itself. It's just a little glimmer into the wonder of awareness when the noise dissipates for a while. In that gap, we can get some sort of appreciation for how we're perfect just the way we are. But that gap occurs through endeavor. You know, we can use some improvement because our minds are amok. Let's get some discipline here. You know, let's get some shamatha, some stability here. So we're perfect just the way we are, and we can practice shamatha. We can improve our mental stabilization. We can make that gap bigger. We can develop more familiarity with a centered, stable, attentive mind. That can be improved. But the awareness which brings it about and the awareness which cognizes it has always been that awareness. It hasn't changed. So right in Zazen, we can study how we're perfect just the way we are, and we can use some improvement. And that they complement each other. They support each other. They don't contradict each other. So we've got work to do. We're in the mud pit. doing the things that we need to do. And we need to do them. We can't look for some spiritual bypass where it's no longer necessary to deal with our karma. That doesn't work. That's another cul-de-sac that will lead to misery eventually. There's work to be done. But lift your head up now and then and look around and see where you're at. See those thousands of feet tall cliffs and waterfalls. See how just to be alive is enough. It's a miracle. Partake of that miracle. And then get back to work. And and to try to bring those two together, cooperating with each other as regularly as you can, to where you live, you're perfect just the way you are. And simultaneously, you got improvement, so that they're supporting each other all the time. If you camp out too much in the work to be done, then it gets daunting and crushing. There's so much to be done. There's a limitless amount of work to be done, and then you just and there's no joy. There's no life in it. If you camp out too much, you're perfect just the way you are. Well, the popular term nowadays for that is spiritual bypassing. You're not attending to the needs that life presents you. And there's a mess growing in a corner that you're just not turning your head towards, because you want to look at this beauty over here. So the safest thing to do is actually to live the paradox. You're perfect just the way you are, and let's cultivate patience so that we don't harm beings. Let's cultivate care so that we grow in patience. Let's cultivate generosity so that we're of help and nurturing for beings. We can grow in this. We can develop this. We can get better at this. But we can do this with joy as an expression of our Buddha nature, as an expression of our true self. We're not trying to create another self. We don't need to create another better self. We need to find venues for our Buddha nature to pop into being, pop into awareness. So to do this, bring those two together. Our innate Buddha nature, we're perfect just the way we are, and the work to be done. To have them in tandem is ideal, and not now I'll do this and later I'll do that, but to have them to live the paradox is ideal. It will maximize progress on the path.